She walked into the wrong room, not knowing she'd just walked into the heart of a millionaire CEO. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is now. Subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The glass doors of Caldwell Industries swallowed Emily Stone whole. Her heart, a small, nervous bird, beat a quick rhythm against her ribs. It was her first day, an intern in the marketing department, fresh from the quiet halls of college. Hope swelled within her, fragile yet insistent, like a newly unfurled leaf. Yet beneath it, a familiar tremor ran through her knees. She clutched her tote bag tighter, its worn canvas a comfort against the stark grandeur. She had rehearsed this morning, every step, every word, but the vast lobby, a labyrinth of polished steel and hushed murmurs, spun her anxieties into a tight knot. On the 24th floor, the long corridor stretched, a silent tunnel lined with identical meeting room doors. Numbers blurred before her anxious eyes. In her desperate haste, a shadow in her mind, she misread. She pushed open the dark wood, the soft click echoing in the sudden quiet of the room beyond. Inside, the air hung heavy, thick with the scent of ambition and hushed expectation. It was a glass-walled sanctuary of immense power. David Sterling, the 32-year-old CEO of Caldwell Industries, sat at the head of a long, sleek table. His presence was calm yet incisive, like a blade sheathed in fine silk. His team, a phalanx of suited executives, turned in unison. Pitch decks, glowing with strategic brilliance, pulsed on a massive screen behind him. "Who are you and what are you doing in my boardroom?" The voice, quiet but edged with precise authority, cut through the heavy stillness. David Sterling looked up, his eyebrows fine dark lines, slightly raised. Emily froze in the doorway. She knew it instantly the second she stepped into the wrong room. The intimidating wall of faces, the luminous screens, a wave of heat rushed to her face, a blush that burned like a sudden shame. Her breath caught in her throat. I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice a fragile thing. She clutched her tote bag tighter, its strap biting into her palm. "I think I walked into the wrong room." She began to back away, willing the polished floor to open and swallow her, but not before a quick, almost instinctive sweep of her blonde hair across her left cheek, a practiced gesture to veil the faint scar that curved beneath her eye. It was an old burn mark, a ghost from childhood, one she'd spent most of her life striving to hide. Her voice trembled, a tiny brittle sound, as she bowed her head and turned on her heel, her heart pounding like a drum in the abrupt silence. David watched her retreat, his gaze fixed on the closing door. His brow, smooth a moment before, subtly furrowed, not with irritation, but with a quiet, stirring curiosity. There was something in the way she had stood, startled, awkward, vulnerable, yet not entirely defeated. She had spoken with an understated dignity, despite her panic, a fragile strength that resonated. Something in her eyes just before she turned lingered with him, a flicker of light from a deep place. She had made a mistake, surely, but she had handled it with an unexpected grace. He turned back to his team, a silent gesture for them to continue. But his mind, a placid pool reflecting the morning light, remained with the girl in the doorway, her face still flushed, her voice so small yet clear, the way she had covered that scar, as if guarding a story. He wanted to know what that story was. He had, in fact, seen her name on an application, a small detail catching his eye weeks ago, a faint outline of a quiet resilience he recognized even then. His assistant leaned in, a soft whisper breaking the boardroom's hum. "Should I check who she was?" David shook his head, a decisive, almost imperceptible movement. "No," he said, his voice calm, yet holding a subtle thread of intent. "Let's just see where she ends up." Emily walked briskly down the hall, her eyes glued to the floor, willing the ground to open and swallow her whole. The heat of that room still bloomed on her skin, a phantom blush. The attention, the weight of David Sterling's gaze, settled upon her like a heavy cloak. Just minutes earlier, in the elevator, she had practiced her introduction, soft words on her tongue. "Hi, I'm Emily Stone, the new intern. I'm really excited to be here." But those words had died in her throat, extinguished by the harsh light of the wrong room. Now she simply wished to disappear, to dissolve into the gentle hum of the building, leaving no trace. A small gesture had indeed sparked a tale, setting hearts in motion, and the one she met held a quiet secret, knowing more than his words revealed, like a shadow half seen in dawn's light. That afternoon, Emily found herself seated at a small cubicle, a private nook nestled in the far end of the 22nd floor. Her new name badge hung a little crooked from her still shaking fingers. No one seemed to notice as she unpacked her notebook, its pages crisp with possibility, and worked to calm the tremors in her spirit. She kept her head bent low, a practiced habit, fearing recognition from earlier, from the grand boardroom and the piercing gaze of David Sterling. She sought the cloak of anonymity, a shield against the world's sharp scrutiny. She did everything to blend into the office's background hum. Long sleeves and high collars became her uniform, even when the summer air hung warm and heavy. Her blonde hair, a pale waterfall, always fell just so, a subtle veil across the faint scar that curved beneath her left eye, a quiet story from a forgotten hurt. Her head remained bowed, her voice a soft murmur, barely a whisper in the office's daily symphony. She evaded company photos like a shadow, preferring to stay at the edges of their bright, public smiles. No selfies graced her social media, no tags, no trace beyond her name on a resume, and her unassuming seat at the marketing floor's quietest corner. To most colleagues, she was simply the reserved intern, a fleeting presence. But beneath this outward reserve, an unseen dedication quietly thrived. She never missed a day, her attendance a steadfast commitment. Once she offered her lunch to Mrs. Albright, the receptionist, when an order went awry, a small, spontaneous kindness. Many evenings, long after the last hurried footsteps faded, she remained to stack chairs after meetings, a silent tidying of the day's scattered remnants. Her words were few, yet her actions spoke volumes in the office's hidden corners. Her dignity was not loud but woven into these small, diligent gestures. That Thursday morning, as the office buzzed with the muted urgency of quarterly deadlines, Emily found herself in the basement archives. The air there was cool and still, thick with the scent of old paper and forgotten time. She was helping Miss Evans, the company's oldest employee, whose movements were slow and deliberate, push a heavy cart laden with old dusty binders towards the elevators. Most avoided this tedious task, but Emily had seen Miss Evans struggling, her movements stiff with age, and had offered help without a moment's hesitation, a simple willingness to lighten a burden. "What would I do without you, dear?" Miss Evans smiled kindly, lines of warmth around her eyes brushing silver hair from her forehead. Emily offered a faint, shy smile in return, slightly embarrassed by the praise. "It's no trouble," she murmured, pushing harder on the cart. Just as they reached the elevators, their metallic doors gleaming under the dim light, a voice, calm and deep, startled them from behind. "You shouldn't have to do this alone, Miss Evans." Miss Evans turned, surprised. "Mr. Sterling," she exclaimed. Emily froze. David Sterling, CEO of Caldwell Industries, stood a few feet away. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, his sleeves rolled slightly, no tie. He looked effortlessly commanding, a quiet force in the dim light, yet his tone held a surprising gentleness. He nodded at Miss Evans, a gesture of respect, then turned to Emily. "What's your name, Monsieur?" he asked. His eyes, the calm, discerning gray she remembered from the boardroom, were kind. Emily hesitated. Her heart, a tiny bird, skipped a beat. She instinctively swept her hair tighter over her scar, a practiced shield. Emily Stone," she stammered, her voice a little breathy. David studied her for a second, his gaze deep, yet not intrusive. Not the way people usually looked, searching for flaws or awkwardness, but as if he were truly seeing her for the first time, seeing the person beneath the timid demeanor. "Well, Emily Stone," he said, his voice a quiet affirmation. "Thank you for helping." And then he did something unexpected. He reached out, his hand, strong and firm, gripped the cart alongside Emily's and helped them push it the final few feet into the elevator. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through his hand as he gripped the cold metal, a fleeting shadow in his eyes suggesting his gentle demeanor hid a burden of his own, a truth unspoken, like a distant thunder. Later that day, back at her desk, bathed in the soft glow of her monitor, Emily's fingers trembled slightly as she typed her report. She could not shake the way he had looked at her, the memory blooming in her mind. Not with pity, not with judgment, only quiet curiosity, and something almost like respect. She had grown up believing the scar made her different, less than something to hide. Yet when she had spoken her name to him, she had done so with more steadiness than she thought she possessed, because he had not looked at the scar. He had looked into her eyes, truly seen her. For the first time in a long time, Emily began to wonder, a soft, fragile question forming in her heart. What if being different did not mean being unworthy? What if the right eyes could see her differently? David Sterling had only asked her name, but for Emily Stone, that simple question had unlocked something she had long forgotten. Her worth was not defined by what people saw on the outside, by the faint mark on her cheek. It was defined by what she did, by her quiet acts of compassion and diligence, and someone had finally seen that. The meeting room on the 10th floor gleamed, glass-walled and sleek, an intimidating expanse. It was the kind of space Emily had only ever walked past, never dared to enter, its polished surfaces reflecting a world she felt distant from. But that morning, her name had appeared on the meeting invite. Not to speak, of course, her supervisor had assured her, but simply to observe, to absorb knowledge from the senior team, a silent presence learning in the shadows. So she sat in the back corner, a small, unobtrusive figure, notebook in hand, striving to quiet the frantic flutter of her nerves. The presentation unfolded, a new marketing campaign for a prominent skincare client, launching a next-generation product line. Slides flickered across the massive screen, a vibrant dance of buzzwords, vivid colors, and catchy slogans. Lauren Hayes, the confident head of marketing, a woman exuding practiced polish, laid out the strategy with smooth, assured tones. This campaign will target a 30 to 45 age demographic, Lauren explained, her voice clear and resonant, with an emphasis on classic beauty, minimalism, and sophistication. We are leaning away from trends and toward timeless. Emily flipped through the printouts, her eyes scanning the data, her mind quietly dissecting the projections. A subtle dissonance stirred within her, a faint discord in the carefully constructed harmony. Something felt off. She hesitated, her palms growing damp, a clammy unease spreading through her. Her eyes darted around the room, filled with sharp-suited executives, including David Sterling, still and watchful at the head of the table. The weight of their gazes, their unspoken authority, pressed down upon her. But the idea, a persistent whisper of truth, kept nagging at her, a small, insistent voice in the quiet chambers of her mind. It began as a tiny seed of doubt, then swelled into firm conviction, and before she could stop herself, before the conscious thought of her place, her timidity could rise and bind her. Her hand was in the air, a small, defiant gesture. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said. Her voice, though soft, cut through the room like a misplaced note in a symphony. "But I think this angle might alienate our younger demographic." The room fell silent, the hum of the projector suddenly prominent. Lauren paused mid-slide, her expression a mix of surprise and irritation. All heads turned in unison, a powerful shift of attention. Emily's chest tightened, a band of ice around her lungs. She could feel every eye on her, the collective weight of their gaze, a burden almost too heavy to bear. For a fleeting, desperate second, she thought she might collapse under the sheer force of it all, dissolve into the polished floor. Then David's voice came, calm and direct, a steady anchor in the swirling chaos of her panic. "Why do you think that, Emily?" She met his gaze. He wasn't testing her, she realized. His eyes, clear and unclouded, held no hint of mockery or challenge. He was genuinely asking, truly seeking an answer, an unexpected invitation to share her truth. A quiet strength, like a hidden spring, bubbled within her. Emily stood up, her posture straightening, her initial tremor fading. "Gen Z and younger millennials are currently the most active social media users," she began, her tone gaining confidence, becoming steadier with each word. "And they are driven by authenticity and inclusivity. If we push too far toward timeless beauty without acknowledging diversity or current values, we risk coming off as outdated, or worse, out of touch." Her voice grew stronger, carrying conviction. "I ran a comparison of engagement metrics between minimalist campaigns and more value-driven ones on the same platform. Campaigns that emphasize inclusivity and real stories performed 36% better in engagement over the last 2 quarters. She held up her printout, a stack of graphs and numbers, her hands now steady, surprisingly firm. Lauren blinked, her polished composure momentarily ruffled. Someone near the window coughed awkwardly, a small, nervous sound breaking the ensuing stillness. David nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Thank you, Emily. That was insightful." He looked around the room, his gaze sweeping over the attentive executives. "Any objections?" Silence. The air hung heavy with unspoken thoughts, with surprise and perhaps a hint of discomfort. Then David spoke again, his voice clear and decisive, ringing with new authority. "You just got your first project, Emily. I want you to lead the concept revision." As the meeting ended, a ripple of subdued murmurs spread through the room. Emily was still standing in place, stunned, the words echoing in her mind. Several people offered soft, "Congratulations," their voices subdued, but not all the looks were friendly. One junior associate scoffed under his breath, a sharp, dismissive sound. Lauren gathered her files with a tight, almost forced smile, her eyes holding a glint of something unreadable. Back at her desk, Emily barely had time to process what had happened. The whirlwind of the last few minutes. She had spoken up. She had contradicted a superior, a confident, established executive. And yet, she had been heard. More than that, she had been trusted by the CEO himself. David walked by an hour later and paused at her desk, his arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Bold move in there," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. Emily looked up, wary. Was it too much? Had she overstepped? David smiled, a small, knowing curve of his lips. It was exactly enough. He walked away, leaving her with the quiet power of his words. Behind her screen, Emily exhaled a shaky breath and allowed herself a small, disbelieving smile. She had not planned to speak, but something inside her, something strong and true, had chosen that moment to rise, and that choice had just changed everything. As David watched Emily present, a memory soft as a fading dream stirred within him. His own struggle years ago, to find his voice and stand against the tide of established views, reshaping his view of Emily from just an intern to a kindred spirit. The days blurred into nights. Emily plunged into the new project, a quiet fire burning within her like a steady flame. Rewriting pitch decks, coordinating with the design team, triple-checking every data source. Each task claimed her focus. Her mind, sharp and precise, stayed firmly on course, driven by the unexpected trust placed upon her. But her body, a fragile vessel, began to falter. She skipped lunches, often forgetting the midday meal altogether. Sleep became a distant luxury, a few snatched hours swallowed by looming deadlines. Coffee, strong and dark, became her constant companion, more liquid than anything else flowing through her veins. Her supervisor, Ms. Collins, praised her dedication, her words swift and appreciative. David, occasionally passing her desk, offered a nod of approval, his gaze lingering for a moment, a silent acknowledgement of her tireless effort. Yet no one truly noticed how pale she had become, the faint shadows under her eyes deepening with each passing hour. No one saw how her hands, once steady, now sometimes trembled slightly when she typed, a subtle tremor that whispered of her deep exhaustion. One night, the office hum faded into a profound stillness. It was nearly 10 p.m. The floor lay empty, the last stragglers having long departed. The lights, sensing no movement, dimmed to a soft, motion sensor glow, casting long, shifting forms. Emily remained at the large conference table, her laptop open, its screen a bright rectangle in the dimness. She was editing the final presentation slides, her eyes burning, her vision blurring at the edges. A sharp ache throbbed behind her temples, but she ignored it, pushing through the haze. She just needed to finish this. A few more edits, then she could rest. The room tilted. The precise lines of the presentation slid sideways, a dizzying blur. Her hands slipped from the keyboard, fingers losing their grip. A wave of dizziness washed over her, cold and sudden. Then everything went black. The silent office swallowed her soft collapse. The security guard making his rounds found her first. Her form, a small huddle on the plush carpet beside the conference table, broke the serene emptiness of the floor. He radioed for help, his voice sharp with urgency. Minutes later, David was rushing down the corridor, his footsteps echoing like thunder in the silent building. The security guard's hurried call had painted a stark image. When he saw her, crumpled on the carpet, so small and still, his stomach dropped, a sudden cold weight. There was no hesitation, no time for thought. Instinct took over, swift and sure. David scooped her into his arms, her weight surprisingly light. He held her close, his movements careful, almost protective. He carried her straight to the medical room on the executive floor, a space usually reserved for minor ailments or executive checkups. He laid her gently on the cot, the soft sheets a stark contrast to the hard office floor. He brushed a stray lock of blonde hair from her forehead, his touch feather-light, almost reverent. "You're okay, Emily," he whispered, his voice low, a soft reassurance. "Just rest." The on-site nurse arrived moments later. She checked Emily's vitals, her movements efficient, dehydrated, exhausted. "Nothing serious," she confirmed, "but it could have been." David stayed while Emily slept, a deep, restorative slumber. He sat in the chair beside her cot, the uncomfortable plastic molding to his form, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. He rubbed his temples, a quiet gesture of weariness. He had noticed her fatigue, the subtle signs. Why hadn't he said anything sooner? Why hadn't he intervened before it came to this? A quiet regret settled within him. As he sat there watching her tranquil sleep, a faint, almost forgotten image flashed in his mind. Soft as a childhood dream, his own mother years ago, her gentle hand cool against his forehead, stroking his hair during a feverish night. Her voice, a soft hum, murmuring words of comfort. The memory, fleeting yet potent, knitted into the present act of care, a deeper thread of personal empathy and unspoken understanding. He saw not just an employee, but a fragile human being, deserving of tenderness. Before he left, as the first hint of dawn began to paint the sky outside the medical room window, David did two things. He called the kitchen, his voice low and precise, requesting a bowl of congee, mild and warm, something his mother used to make when he was ill. Then he tore a page from his small notebook and wrote, in clean, steady handwriting, "Take care of yourself, Emily. You matter." He placed the note next to the steaming bowl on the small bedside table, a silent message of care. He turned off the light, leaving the room bathed in soft, natural light, and closed the door softly behind him, his footsteps quiet, almost reverent. A single act had bent the heart's path, subtle but profound, weaving into a deeper thread, tied to a memory and meaning unnoticed before. Emily woke just after dawn, the room a canvas of soft, pearly light. The hush of the medical room embraced her, a gentle stillness replacing the office's distant hum. The blanket, light and yielding, was tucked snugly around her shoulders. She sat up slowly, still groggy, her mind hazy like morning mist. Then she saw it, the bowl of porridge, faintly warm, a comforting presence on the small table beside the cot, and beside it, the note. She picked it up with shaking fingers. Her eyes, heavy with sleep, scanned the words. "Take care of yourself, Emily. You matter." Once, twice. The words, simple yet profound, resonated deep within her. A single tear, warm and unexpected, slipped down her cheek, tracing a path past the faded scar. No one had ever written something like that to her, not her teachers, not her foster parents, not even old friends. But someone had now. And that someone had carried her here, had cared enough to leave this silent token. She held the note to her chest, pressing it close, staring at the ceiling where the morning light painted quiet patterns. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a burden. She felt seen, truly, deeply seen. She reached for the porridge, its gentle warmth a promise, and took a spoonful. It was plain, simple, but to Emily it tasted like care. And care was something she'd learned to live without until now. Emily returned to work quietly, her body still weak from exhaustion, but her spirit sharp with a renewed purpose. The note, folded carefully, nestled in her pocket, a hidden strength. She poured herself into the campaign she'd been entrusted with. Every graphic, every word, every audience test. She tackled them all with a quiet fervor, like someone with a profound point to prove. And she did. Each day she arrived early and stayed late, her commitment unwavering. Her presentations were clearer, more concise, filled with the quiet power of conviction. Her confidence, once a fragile sprout, was steadier now, growing with each successful step. She no longer walked with her hair instinctively shielding her face. The scar was a familiar part of her, not a mark of shame, but such newfound confidence, she would soon learn, often drew as much judgment as admiration, casting a subtle shadow even as it illuminated her path. One afternoon, the office hummed with its usual midday rhythm. Emily passed the break room, her thoughts on the next meeting, just as two colleagues, Jessica and Kevin, were talking. They didn't see her pause just outside the door, her steps silent on the carpet. "Unbelievable," Jessica muttered, her voice sharp, flipping through a design printout with a dismissive flick of her wrist. "Come in here with that scar on her face, barely talks to anyone, and now she's presenting to clients like she owns the place." Her tone was laced with bitter envy, a subtle poison in the air. Kevin chuckled dryly, a harsh, grating sound. "Maybe sleeping with the CEO will get you the project." His words hung in the air, heavy and crude. "Yeah," Jessica scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. "Scarred and scared. Must be the new office chic." Emily's heart thudded, A sudden, violent beat against her ribs. The words sharp and cruel echoed in the quiet space, slicing deeper than any physical pain. That familiar mark, always at the forefront of her fears. A cold wave washed over her, a familiar dread. Her hands began to shake, a rapid tremor. She turned abruptly, rushing toward the stairwell, her eyes burning, holding back tears that threatened to spill, hot and shaming. The weight of their scorn pressed down on her, a crushing burden, sealing a wound she'd thought had begun to heal. Later that evening, long after most colleagues had left, she sat alone in an empty corner of the office, her laptop's glow a solitary light. She tried to focus, to lose herself in the figures and reports, but her thoughts spun, a chaotic, unbidden whirlwind. She'd spent years, countless lonely years, believing her scar was why she'd never truly be seen, only pitied, or worse, dismissed. And just when she thought she'd moved past it, had found a fragile sense of acceptance, those words, scarred and scared, sliced deeper than she ever imagined, reopening an old wound with brutal precision. The quiet resolve she'd built, piece by painful piece, crumbled around her. The sense of belonging, the fragile hope, seemed to shatter into countless fragments. She picked up her laptop, her fingers still trembling, and began typing. Not a report, not a pitch deck. She typed out her resignation. The heart's stirring had begun to ripple outward, visible in small deeds and words, but it had sealed one wound only to unveil a deeper rift, like a crack appearing in a village well, threatening its very foundation. David found out the next morning. The unread email in his inbox, stark and brief, simply titled "Thank you and goodbye," caught his eye like a sudden shadow. His brow, usually smooth and contemplative, furrowed instantly. He opened it, his fingers moving with swift precision. As he read Emily's formal, yet unmistakably heartbroken, words of resignation, a cold dread coiled in his stomach. He wasted no time. This wasn't merely an employee leaving. This was something deeper, something profoundly wrong. A wound festering beneath the polished surface of his company. By noon, the familiar hum of Caldwell Industries was pierced by a subtle undercurrent of tension. Jessica and Kevin were summoned to the HR conference room. The atmosphere within the glass-walled room hung heavy, thick with unspoken accusations, a palpable discomfort. David arrived, not as the detached CEO, calm and composed behind a mask of corporate impartiality, but as a man whose face was etched with profound disappointment, his discerning gray eyes holding a quiet, unwavering fire. "You represent this company," he stated, his voice even, yet carrying an unmistakable steel that vibrated through the hushed space. He stood, tall and unyielding, his gaze sweeping over Jessica and Kevin. "You are responsible not only for the quality of your work, but the quality of your conduct." He paused, letting the words settle, their weight pressing down on the two colleagues, his eyes fixed on Jessica, their intensity unwavering, stripping away her usual confidence. "Mocking someone's appearance, spreading personal rumors, that is not only cruel, it's unacceptable." His voice, though still calm, held a tremor of personal conviction, a resonance that echoed deeper than mere policy. He turned to Ms. Jenkins, the head of HR, her face equally stern, her lips a thin line of agreement. "We have zero tolerance for this." The room fell silent, the air thick with unspoken consequences, with the sudden, sharp reality of their actions. Jessica and Kevin, usually so confident, shifted uneasily in their seats, their faces pale, their defiance dissolving under the directness of his gaze. David's words, quiet but firm, hung in the air, final and unyielding, a judgment rendered without fanfare. Jessica's casual cruelty, her biting words about Emily's scar, had unknowingly grazed an old, unhealed wound within David himself, a deeper rift tied to a distant memory where he had stood by, silent and unable to defend someone vulnerable. Emily's pain had become a stark reflection of his own unresolved regret, a quiet shame he had long carried. After the meeting, the weight of its aftermath still lingering in the corporate air, David sought out Emily. She was in the quiet library lounge on the 8th floor, a secluded space filled with the hushed scent of old books and the soft glow of lamplight. She sat alone, a small figure illuminated by the gentle radiance of her laptop screen. Her shoulders were slightly slumped, her posture echoing the quiet sorrow that had led her to this secluded corner. She looked up as he approached, her eyes still holding a lingering sadness, like a quiet pool after a storm, reflecting a deep, internal ache. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible, tinged with a familiar self-blame that constricted her throat. She gestured vaguely at the laptop, its screen a silent testament to her undone work. I know it's a distraction. She assumed he had come to accept her resignation, to finalize her quiet departure, to tie up the loose ends of her brief tenure. A wave of resignation, cold and weary, washed over her. David shook his head, a slow, deliberate movement that carried immense weight. He sat beside her on the comfortable lounge sofa, the soft cushions yielding to his presence. He was close but not touching, an electric proximity that neither acknowledged in words but both felt, a current of unspoken understanding. "It's not your job to be invisible so others can feel safe," he said, his voice low, a quiet anchor in her stormy heart, a steady hand reaching across the chasm of her insecurity. His words were not just a statement, they were a gentle command, an invitation to step into her own light. Emily looked away, her gaze fixed on a distant shelf of leather-bound books, unable to meet his steady eyes, unable to face the raw honesty she knew she would find there. Her voice cracked, a fragile sound, breaking like thin ice. "They said no one would ever take me seriously. Not with this face." Her hand instinctively went to her cheek, covering the scar, a lifetime of habit, a shield against the world's harsh gaze, a desperate attempt to shrink from view. He turned toward her gently, his movement unhurried, deliberate. Then, with a tenderness that made her breath catch, a tenderness she rarely encountered, he lifted his hand. His fingers, warm and reassuring, brushed a lock of blonde hair behind her ear, pushing it back from her face, unveiling the very thing she sought to hide. His fingers paused, resting lightly on the faded scar, a silent, intimate gesture that acknowledged its presence without judgment. "This scar," he said softly, his voice a quiet murmur, imbued with a deep conviction that resonated through her very being, "doesn't make you less beautiful. It makes you unforgettable." His gaze held hers, unwavering, reflecting the soft lamplight, not filled with pity, not with judgment, but with something deeper, something profoundly accepting, something that saw beyond the surface. "It's part of you," he continued, his thumb gently stroking the skin near the scar, a delicate touch. "But it's not all of you, and I see every part." Her breath caught in her chest, a sudden, sharp intake of air. For the first time in her life, someone had said the words she never knew she needed to hear. The words resonated deep within her, a melody of acceptance that had been missing from her life's quiet score, a balm to an old, festering wound. She reached up, her trembling fingers touching his hand, still resting against her cheek, a fragile bridge between their souls. "I don't want to quit," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion, the words barely a breath, but they carried the weight of a lifetime of struggle, a turning point. "Not anymore." "Good," David replied, a small, genuine smile touching his lips, a quiet affirmation that settled deep within her. And just like that, the scar no longer felt like something to hide, a mark of shame to be concealed. It felt like a badge of survival, a testament to strength, a quiet victory, and the beginning of something new, a tender dawn. What Emily had sought, to erase the mark of the past, to become invisible, was not what she found. Instead, she found a profound acceptance, a new path leading to an unexpected sense of belonging, making the scar a beacon rather than a burden. A moment of connection had yielded a gentle reckoning. What she sought was not what she found, like a path leading to an unexpected home. Spring turned to early summer, and Caldwell Industries hummed with a renewed vigor, a vibrant current flowing through its halls. The company unveiled its most ambitious community initiative yet, the Bright Futures Scholarship. This fund aimed at supporting children recovering from severe burns, weaving together education, therapy, and reintegration support. David had entrusted Emily with leading its development, a bold choice given her status, but one rooted in her profound insight, quiet compassion, and lived experience. For days, Emily juggled research, stakeholder meetings, design reviews, and budget planning. She collaborated tirelessly with external nonprofits, her dedication unwavering. She held brainstorming sessions with colleagues, her once timid voice now confident, brimming with ideas. She worked late into the night, crafting intricate slide decks, and rehearsed her speech until her voice cracked, raw from the effort. The faint scar on her chin might have been visible to a keen eye, but now she barely noticed it. Her focus lay on purpose, not perfection, on impact, not mere appearance. On the morning of the launch event, the auditorium thrummed with anticipation. Employees, donors, Families and community leaders filled the seats, a sea of expectant faces. A banner at the front, simple yet powerful, proclaimed, "Bright Futures Scholarship, Igniting Hope, Restoring Confidence." Backstage, Emily felt her heart pounding, a frantic drum against her ribs. Her palms were damp, a testament to the lingering nerves. She smoothed her blouse, took a deep, steadying breath, and prepared to step into the light. David appeared beside her, his presence a calming force. He offered a reassuring smile, his eyes holding a quiet warmth. He placed a gentle hand on her back, a silent gesture of support. "You remember why this matters," he murmured softly. "Just speak from the heart." She nodded, tears bright and unbidden, glistening in her eyes. She stepped forward as her name was announced from the podium. The lights found her, a ribbon spotlight illuminating her form. Cameras clicked, a hushed flurry of sound. A hush fell over the audience. Her voice wavered for a moment, a fragile tremor, then steadied, finding its rhythm. "Good morning," she said, her gaze sweeping across the expectant faces. "My name is Emily Stone, and I am honored to stand before you today as a representative of Caldwell Industries, and more importantly, as someone who believes deeply in the power of healing and education." She greeted the families in the front row, children with bandaged skin and bright, hopeful smiles. She glanced briefly at the banner above. "As a child with my own burn scar, I know, not just as a statistic, but personally, how difficult it can be to feel seen, to feel worthy." Her voice, imbued with raw honesty, resonated through the hall. "Burns don't just affect the body, they leave marks on the heart. And those marks can be invisible to the world." She paused, taking a breath, then continued, her voice gaining strength, flowing like a quiet stream. "This scholarship fund is built on more than financial support. It offers therapy, mentorship, and community workshops. It's built to restore confidence, to tell every child, your story is not your scar, you are so much more." She moved to the next slide, showing photos of smiling children, a school setting, mentors hugging participants. "Over the next year, we aim to reach 100 children, provide scholarships for college prep, tutoring, emotional support services, and a community network that won't let them feel alone." Her original data, her own carefully compiled notes, gave weight to every statement, filling her words with authenticity. When she finished, she stepped back, heart pounding, and waited. Silence hung for a moment, then applause, slow at first, building into a standing ovation, a wave of heartfelt appreciation. Emily's eyes filled with tears as colleagues and volunteers rose, some wiping their eyes, others nodding in respect. David strode forward, clapping as loud as anyone, his face alight with quiet pride. Afterwards, guests mingled, and the mood was warm, a gentle hum of conversation. Donors shook Emily's hand, their words filled with admiration. Families expressed gratitude, their eyes shining with hope. Emily moved between groups, smiling, answering questions. No longer feeling like an imposter. She was home, truly home, in this moment. Behind her, she heard footsteps and turned to see David standing tall, watching her from across the room. He strode forward and wrapped her in a brief, proud hug. "You were amazing," he said quietly, his voice a warm whisper close to her ear. Emily exhaled, a soft sound. "I was scared," she admitted. He smiled. "You were brave." He then guided her to the front again as the CEO took the stage to add remarks. David cleared his throat, his voice firm and full of pride. "Today is more than a launch. It is a promise, a commitment to children who deserve more than pity. They deserve opportunity." He paused, then fixed his gaze on Emily before addressing the audience. "And it is a special moment for me personally because this project did not begin with me. It began with someone who spoke from her truth, someone who invited us all to listen. She's not just an intern, she's the heart of this mission." He looked at her, his admiration clear, a deep, silent message passing between them. Then he gestured to the audience. The applause swelled again, stronger than before, a joyful roar. Colleagues who once eyed her wearily now cheered her by name. Among the proud faces, Miss Evans washed with quiet tears, a gentle nod of recognition. Later, as the evening wound down, the crowd thinned. Emily and David stayed behind. She looked at the trophy-like plaque he had arranged by the stage, her name engraved, acknowledging her leadership. She stared, overwhelmed, a quiet wonder in her eyes. David faced her. "You earned every bit of this," he said, his voice soft but certain. She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, reflecting the soft glow of the stage lights. "I feel seen," she whispered. He reached over and turned off the stage lighting, leaving soft ambient lamps glowing. The two stood alone, surrounded by empty chairs and the echoes of success. "I did," he replied, voice barely above a whisper, "and I hope the rest of the world will see you too." As he spoke, a dignified elderly woman with silver hair, Nurse Eleanor, approached them from the lingering shadows near the back of the auditorium, her eyes gentle. "Emily," she said, her voice soft, yet carrying the weight of years. Emily turned, surprised. "You spoke beautifully, my dear. I remember a little girl, so very brave, with a spirit like no other. I was your nurse decades ago at St. Jude when you first came to us." Emily's breath hitched. A flood of forgotten kindness, of gentle hands and soothing words washed over her. This was the nurse from her earliest, haziest memories, the one who had first tended her wounds, a shared past, quietly revealed. David, seeing the profound connection, stepped forward. His voice filled the quiet space, resonant and clear. "Tonight, as we look to the future, we also honor our past. It is with immense gratitude that we announce the renaming of our fund. From this day forward, the Bright Futures Scholarship will be known as the Eleanor Stone Foundation." He gestured to Nurse Eleanor, then to Emily, his eyes shining with pride. The quiet room broke into a reverent applause, deeper and more meaningful than before. Later, the evening air was crisp as Emily and David stepped out onto the quiet walkway behind the office building. Stars shimmered overhead, and pool lights reflected off the surface of the small lake just beyond the manicured lawn. It was late, but David had asked her to stay a bit longer, and she had agreed, a quiet curiosity shining in her weary eyes. They walked side by side, footsteps echoing softly against the paved path. The hum of the city felt distant, replaced by the gentle lapping of water and rustling leaves. Emily inhaled a steadying breath, hugging her blazer tight. She was still glowing from the triumph of the launch, but it was a softer, deeper radiance now. David stopped by a bench, his silhouette sharp against the park lamp's glow. He motioned to it with a quiet nod. They sat down, shoulders close but not touching, an electric proximity that neither acknowledged in words but both felt, a subtle warmth. They were silent at first. The night seemed to ask nothing but presence. "Beautiful night," Emily said, her voice soft. She turned to look at him, the outline of his face softened by lamplight, and realized how his presence always calmed her, like something steady she could lean into. David's shoulders relaxed. "Yeah, quiet time is good." David reached into his coat pocket. For a moment, she thought it was the note from earlier. Instead, he pulled out a small, polished hand mirror. He held it out to her, smooth metal, copper reflecting the sidewalk lights. "Look inside," he said, his voice a soft invitation. Emily tilted her head, taken aback. He tapped the mirror softly. "See yourself." She raised it slowly, her fingers trembling. At first, she saw the scar staring back, a familiar point of focus. But then, her eyes meeting her own in the glass, something shifted. She looked whole, strong, serene, brave. David's voice hovered over the quiet stillness. "That's who you are, every time I look at you." Emily's throat constricted. She looked up, searching his face. He added softly but with quiet certainty, "Strong, brilliant, and so beautiful." She swallowed, her finger brushing the mirror's edge. "No, Her voice trailed off. Words felt inadequate. David reached out and gently lowered the mirror, his hand brushing hers in transit. Simple but electric. He didn't say more. He didn't need to, because his gaze, deep and unwavering, said everything. Emily looked down at her hands, then back up at him. She felt warmth flood through her chest, filling the space that insecurity had occupied for so long. He shifted a bit closer on the bench, an unspoken invitation. She met his eyes, then smiled, soft, genuine, calm. It rarely felt perfect, but it felt like truth. David closed his eyes, took a breath, and reached for her hand. His touch was light, tentative, respectful, but undeniable. She let him take it. She felt the pulse in his palm, and she felt her own heart finally quiet. They sat in silence, hands joined, sharing comfort without words. In that moment, there was no need for a grand gesture, no need for flowers, declarations, or promises. Just this recognition, that the person across you saw you, all of you, and thought you were enough. No fireworks necessary, just belonging. Emily rested her head on his shoulder. For a heartbeat, he rested his forehead gently against hers. That single breath, calm and open, sealed something tender between them. No bouquet growing brighter than his eyes, no needless poetry, just two hearts visible and softly, perfectly seen. They remained seated until the hush of the lake blended into their quiet certainty. The night sky watched over them, serene as the lake's reflection, and the world beyond flickered faintly. But here, in that space, they were wholly together. No words were left unsaid, no shadows left unshared. Emily surrendered to a feeling she never thought she deserved, and David simply held her. Healing was incomplete, a continuous journey, but it was shared like hands clasped in quiet understanding. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that hope can be found in the most surprising moments, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Heartwarming Love Story. We bring you stories that touch the soul, renew your belief in kindness, and highlight what's truly important in life.